Now it's working. Greetings, this is JFK researcher Richard M. Hooke, and I just wanted to take a moment to explain how this research project with Mr. Rod Mac Kenzie came into being. In Northern California in 2012, I downloaded off the internet a very strange and cryptic manuscript, The Men That Don't Fit In, by Roderick A. Mackenzie III, aka Ward Alexander. It was tough reading at first, written all in capital letters in a sort of rough, brash mob lingo. And as I browsed through its some 90 pages, there were wonderful cartoonish drawings of carnivals and the Mafia by Mr. Mackenzie himself. And then toward the end, there were drawings related to the JFK assassination. And I could see this Rosetta Stone of mid-20th century hieroglyphics all led up to a climactic chapter about 4/5 of the way through, titled The JFK Hit Parade. I read Mr. Mackenzie's manuscript at least 2 or 3 times before I began to get the gist of his world in the 1950s and 60s of a U.S. Army soldier in the Korean War and a Mafia associate and U.S. intelligence asset in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New Orleans, Havana, Cuba, Chicago, and Dallas, Texas. And there were so many characters I'd read about related to the JFK assassination. And being a dedicated researcher, I became curiouser and curiouser. I printed the full 99 pages, delved in, and it began to dawn on me I'd come across a most unique historical document written by an actual participant in that world, a veritable Rosetta Stone of the assassination of President Kennedy. Mr. Mackenzie's book describes an enormous U.S. intelligence operation /hit, the seeds of which were planted years in advance, organized by the highest powers of the U.S. government, politicians, agents, businessmen, bankers, mafia dons, and appointed and elected officials who, the evening of November 21st, 1963, attended a bogus Pepsi convention held at the Dallas Cabana Motel to get sugar prices down, providing them all with a mass alibi, while in reality, at approximately 9:45 p.m., the conspirators carpooled down Stemmons Boulevard to Clint Murchison's Dallas mansion and routinely signed off as a group on 2 affidavits to have President John F. Kennedy and Governor John Conley shot to death at 12:30 p.m. on Elm Street in Dealey Plaza the following day, November 22nd, 1963. Not dissimilar to the way in ancient Rome, all the senators were required to shove their knives into Julius Caesar. Could it all be true? As I've read Mackenzie's account and questioned him again and again, I've become thoroughly convinced that is exactly the way it happened. By July of 2014, I had completed my first 2 books on the JFK assassination, The Man with the Mona Lisa Smile and 12 Shots That Shook the World. And I was satisfied and exhausted, as any author of books can relate, by the all-encompassing effort required to write books. And at the same time, I was excited, having discovered in the course of my journey what I was quite certain were new truths concerning the JFK assassination. And in my second book, 12 Shots, I included a chapter, a synopsis really, of Mr. Mackenzie's book I called Rod Mac Soldier of Fortune. It was a sunny California morning in early July of 2014 when I walked out my dirt driveway, opened the gray tin mailbox, and discovered a fat, rumpled brown 9 by 12-inch package from Roderick A. Mackenzie III. Apparently, Mr. Mackenzie, having been shown a computer CD of my account of his adventures, had been satisfied with my presentation of his life and had decided to send me a package containing additional information about himself and more details concerning the assassination of President Kennedy. Mr. Mackenzie is a decorated U.S. Army veteran of the Korean War who, upon his U.S. Army discharge in 1958 in San Francisco, California, became a Mafia associate with William Morgan and Bill Herzog in San Francisco, John Roselli in Los Angeles, and Las Vegas, and Louis McWillie in Havana, Cuba. And having observed Mackenzie's obvious artistic talents, a guy named Abe Weissman recommended Mackenzie attend CIA fake ID training at Fort Detrick, Maryland. And Mackenzie thus became a Defense Intelligence Agency asset around Havana, New Orleans, Chicago, and ended up managing a safe house on Holland Avenue in Dallas for the DIA, CIA, and FBI Division 5, providing a safe haven for assassins who were passing through. And that safe house then was used by the U.S. government-sanctioned and CIA Permandex-funded Texas School Book Depository 6th-floor hit team to conspire and then shoot President John F. Kennedy. Mr. Mackenzie, as he has explained to me, has a form of post-traumatic stress syndrome over the many hair-raising and awful experiences he was involved in the past. And in his twilight years, Mackenzie has felt the need to get as much of the truth out as he can, because he believes our history of these events should be recorded as accurately as possible, as it has been obscured by a massive CIA cover-up campaign of disinformation and lies. Mackenzie and I both concur that facing the truth is the most beneficial course for regular citizens, so in the ensuing analysis, future generations will more fully understand why and how these unfortunate events happen to occur. As a JFK researcher, having discovered Rod Mac Kenzie, I felt almost like early 20th century archaeologist Howard Carter, having come across the lost tomb of King Tutankhamun. As Mackenzie has provided so many details, having been a need-to-know participant and curator of the JFK Book of the Dead for 53 plus years, concerning where the bodies of true information are buried in the Valley of the Kings. Mackenzie has provided us rare treasures, if you will, like golden scarabs, canopic urns, and turquoise pendants of feldspar, amethyst, and lapis lazuli, a Permandex voucher, photographs of Ruth Ann Martinez, drawings of the lost Holland Avenue safe house, descriptions of Dave Ferry's apartment, Guy Bannister's detective agency, H.L. Hunt's clubhouse, the private back room of Joe Campisi's Egyptian restaurant, Jake Miranda's Circus Lounge bar, and the Speakeasy catacombs behind, where during the week following the assassination, the invisible walls of Need to Know collapsed between disc asset Rod Mackenzie and one of the signers of the conspiratorial affidavits, disc O&I agent Malcolm Wallace. And Wallace, in a drunken rant, broke the conspiratorial pact of anonymity and confessed to Rod Mackenzie how Lyndon B. Johnson had finally decided to make his move. And LBJ and J. Edgar Hoover, Mac Wallace, and their fellow conspirators had murdered President John F. Kennedy. Mr. Mackenzie, in the course of dozens of phone conversations, has become a very good friend of mine. Hour after hour, he has told it like it was. And he's always done his best to be truthful, accurate, and not to embellish where he's not certain. Mr. Mackenzie is always positive, prompt, consistent, and despite his macabre, sexually explicit, and at times disgusting sense of humor, Mackenzie is a man's man from back in the day. And I can certainly picture how Sam Giancana and then John Roselli and Del Graham, when they were business partners with Mackenzie, before Roselli went on a fishing trip with Carlos Marcello's buddies and was chopped up in a barrel, Del Graham was decapitated under a San Diego freeway, and Sam G was shot by a close friend in his basement while he was making sausage. Undoubtedly, they all had laughed until they cried at Mackenzie's warm camaraderie and tremendously explicit humor, as I also have now shared these grand times. And hopefully, because of Mr. Mackenzie's revelations, he and I will not now share the same fate of his associates, the curse of so many witnesses and investigators who've dared to look too closely at the truth about the death of the last American king, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. We will soon see. In my opinion, Mr. Mackenzie is an American who is trying to tell his fellow Americans the truth. And like everyone else in the course of their lives, he made some poor decisions. Mr. Mackenzie, a man of modest means, says that's what he got for having been employed by the circus all of those years. But Mackenzie has always been most generous and has never expressed any desire to profit monetarily from his life story. Mr. Mackenzie's greatest quality is that he has the guts to face what happened, to lay it all out on the table for the rest of us to examine so we can begin to understand ourselves and our country and be more likely to lead more humane, empathetic, moral, and beneficial lives today and in our future.